Did you notice that the gospel lesson today started off with Jesus coming to a level place? And he heals many people and then proceeds into the section that is commonly known as one of the two reportings of the Beatitudes. Jesus is at a level place preaching the Beatitudes. Now, many of you, and over the years, many folks from time to time, I'm not getting a big head here, have told me that I'm not a half-bad preacher. Fair enough. I've preached a sermon or two over the course of many years that even I have liked, and when I find a really good one, I've been known to recycle it. Find a new place, a new opportunity where I might try preaching that one again because it seemed to work pretty well. And I've always wondered if Jesus did the same thing. Maybe that would explain the difference between Matthew's version of the Beatitudes and Jesus' versions of Luke's version of the Beatitudes, because they are very different. Maybe Jesus repeated himself and preached two very similar sermons in different circumstances. Or maybe Matthew and Luke are just making different points. That actually makes a whole lot of sense. Now remember, too, Luke never met Jesus while Jesus was alive and before the crucifixion. Luke comes along in the story much later. Luke's kind of an interesting guy. He may be the only non-Jewish author of any of the texts in the Bible. Maybe. He certainly is converted long after Jesus dies and is resurrected again. So he's not hanging around and reporting the events of Jesus' life as he saw them because he wasn't there. Matthew may have been. And Matthew tells the Sermon of the Beatitudes in a very different way. It comes in the middle of what we call the Sermon on the Mount. Now, it makes perfect sense for Matthew to remember this as a top of a mountain. Matthew has a kind of subtly recurring theme that is woven through all of his gospel. In the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus is the genealogy of Jesus, right at the very beginning, comes from King David and comes down to Jesus. In the Gospel of Matthew, the kings from the east come and pay homage to the Christ child. In the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus and his parents flee to Egypt, and out of Egypt, Jesus comes back. Jesus goes up on a mountain to deliver the most definitive teachings of God. The parallel that we are supposed to bear in mind is between Jesus and Moses. Because one of the things Matthew wants to be telling us is that Moses and Jesus are both really good Jewish boys, and Jesus is better at it. If you want to be Jewish, the best way to be Jewish is pay attention to Jesus and be Jewish his way. 5 books of Moses. The Sermon on the Mount has 5 main sections. Moses has commandments. Jesus has beatitudes. And Jesus is up on the mountain revealing the divine will of the Father to the children of Israel. Makes perfect sense for how Matthew wants to tell the story. Luke tells the story very differently. Now, either it's a sermon given at another time or Luke's got another agenda, because in Luke's gospel, there are no kings who show up at the birth of Jesus. There are shepherds. And remember, shepherds is another word for drunks. They're just assumed that there's nothing else to do out there with the flocks, and they've been drinking all night, so shepherds are drunks. Jesus does not go up on the mountain. He comes down to the level place to give the teaching. And in that little difference, I think there's a tremendous important point that we often just run right by and overlook. Matthew's versions of the Beatitudes will talk about, blessed are you who hunger and thirst after righteousness. Luke says, blessed are you who are hungry. Matthew's version will say, blessed are you for the pure in heart. Luke will say, blessed are the poor. Now, it's not just that Luke is trying to tell us that God somehow likes poor people more than rich people, in which case everyone in America is in trouble. No, Luke is trying to make a different point. This being in the level place, this beatitude about blessed are you of the poor, blessed are you who are hungry, I think Luke is trying to tell us that Jesus comes down to meet us where we are. And even more than that, it's precisely in the level, low points of life that we are most open to hearing what God has to say. When things are going really well, most of us do not take a moment and say, thank you, God, although we should. Most of us, when things are going really well, say, wow, I'm doing a pretty good job. And therein lies all the difference, isn't it? I can remember so vividly the first serious girlfriend. And how when we broke up, and by the way, she dumped me, the heartache, how I thought it would never, ever be the same. Of course it was. Of course God led me to something else. And I'd like to think that there is more to this just Beatitudes than God assuring us, if you're poor, don't worry about it, it'll get better. If you're being harassed in school or by friends, don't worry about it, it'll get better. Now, I do think that that is true. I do believe that God wishes us well and wants us to do well and is showering us with benefits of all kinds. But I'm not going to simply come out here today and tell you, oh, don't worry about it. If anything is going wrong in your life, God's going to make it all better. Because that's just not very convincing. It's true, but it's not very convincing. But here's what I will tell you. That in our low times, in our low places, in those moments when you and I look to the heavens for succor, for solace, when we look for someone to hear our cry, we are most open to God, and those are precisely the moments when other people are most open to us. If you really want to help someone, it takes more than just being willing to listen and share their pain. It takes also coming from a place in yourself where you too can share your pain. A person who is hungry is far more willing to accept food from someone that they think may have been hungry themselves. A person who is looking for God is not very interested in hearing from the expert on God. Instead, if, for example, a few times in my life when I've said to someone who's looking for God in their life, you know, I've had that same problem, or I've wondered that myself, or I've struggled in my own relationship with God at times. All of those are true statements. You know, being ordained is not magic. And once we're ordained, we're not suddenly best friends with God and all mysteries fall away. I wish that were true. Maybe you got that at your ordination. I didn't get it at mine. Wrestling with God, questioning God, wondering what God is up to, not having the answers. staple of my life, but a willingness to come back again and again and ask, a willingness to share with other people who have that kind of questioning in their life, a willingness to say, I don't know, and I'm not going to give you an easy, cliche answer as to what God is up to. But we'll work it out together. Let's see if we can figure it out. Goes a lot further in evangelizing, in comforting, in being with people. So, the truth is, I have absolutely no idea what God is up to most of the time. That just makes me human, doesn't it? But the truth also is that when God's people gather together and remember the words of our Lord and Savior, blessed are you when it looks darkest. Blessed are you who struggle. Blessed are you when it just doesn't look like things are going your way. Hold on, because that is exactly the moment when you are able to see God closest in your own life. How comforting those words are.